An unborn boy tends to his mother long after her death. A child with a swollen head cries for help, trapped beneath a lonely house. A woman speaks to a lover from across oceans, worlds, and death itself. These people, you and I, all have something in common. We know the truth, that the earth died long ago. The human race lives, works, and dies atop a corpse. With this knowledge, we descend slowly into madness. For we know there is nothing that can be done, except to wonder what will come next. This week's story is Gutterlovers.
Gabriel, Gabriel, wherefore art thou, Gabriel? I gazed into the porcelain bowl I knew to be the particular item within my predicament's purview most likely to carry my lover's pungent scent. Not for any profane reason, mind you. Gabriel has never even set foot in my home. The reason I attached myself to the toilet in my attached bathroom was simply because his father sold such seats by trade and had installed this very model many years ago. Had my father been cognizant of this fact, he very well might have unlocked my door, stormed into my room, and ripped the fixture, flange and all, from its foundation. My patriarch is so pissed he'd prefer me peeing precisely in the sewer line to avoid even a scant scent of my suitor. So there I was, perched upon my Sunday pumps, dreaming of my darling boy. Why had our love gone to the gutter, you ask? Well, my father and Gabe's were once inseparable. One man sells toilets and the other installs them. You are aware of this, I'm sure. That is why Gabriel and I live in the opulent, opposing estates you surely see from the quaint container you call a home. These two men represent our gated community. They're our foremost magnates. Everybody poops, my daddy once said. But then a sewer line went sour and raw waste gave way to a raw deal. One man could not be bothered to give a shit about the excrement the other was neck-deep within, and now, the loyal ship is toast. After that mix-up, my contact with Gabriel and his family was strictly verboten. My daddy's sweet Violet could not strain, push, and plop out of her mind the story she once had been told of a powerful union. A togetherness of blood, money, and agency. And love, of course. I had already caught Gabriel's gaze straying from my own several times, and this simply could not be further avoided if our contact was altogether severed. So I acted brashly. I met with my man in the midst of midnight, and placed mine mouth upon his. Unfortunately, the dual detectives told to trail these sneaking 20-somethings turned their torches upon us just as we sealed our love and our fates with that single kiss. Which brings us to where we started. Me in my meager 3,000-square-foot bedroom, bathroom, and closet, and guest room's closet, and guest room's closet's bathroom, secreted away from the outside world. I laid beside the toilet, dreaming of my sweet Gabriel's sweet holdings, holding me in his arms, his wealth of love, and his stunning good-looking clothes, cars, and accoutrements. As a child, I heard tell of a secret tunnel that led deep into the earth beneath our abode and connected with the other deep, secret tunnel leading from the residence of Gabriel and his family. Story has it, each tunnel was intended as an escape route, not a connector between the two princely estates. Both had simply been under construction at the same time, in 2008 or so. What a coincidence. And as our family saying goes, the only person a rich man wants to run into alone in the dark is another rich man. And so they decided to keep the tunnel connected as a symbol of their trust and joint sovereignty. As a curious teenager, I had spent summers searching for this pathway, only to come up empty-handed. As Gabriel and I grew, we often spoke of this hidden connection our families shared, though neither of us had a clue of our entrance's whereabouts. And believe me, since my daddy locked me in my room, I have scoured every inch of my confinement for such a secret. So there I was, prostrated at the throne of my lover's family's construction. I wailed, long, stuttering, ugly sound of primal love and lucrative libido. Ugh. I cried Gabriel's name into the still water. I filled it with tear-soaked paper. I flushed, keened, filled, and flushed again. And then, just as I collapsed once more, my energies and passion again spent, I heard a response to my call. My name gurgled out of the waters as they poured to the bowl from the tank. And though I could not be sure due to the waterlogged quality of the sound, I could have sworn the vocal cords which uttered those 3 syllables belonged to my searching love's target. "Gabriel!" I shouted ecstatically, flushing his name down and out of my house. The response came again from the water line to the tank to the bowl to my ears. Down? And to where? I ran to my window and peered out over our kingdom. Not there. I glanced beneath the door leading from my confinement out into the north wing. Certainly not there. And I leaned against the vents closest to the floor. I shouted my lover's name, but he was not to be found beneath me in any sense that I could make of it. So I returned to my toilet and performed the sending ritual again. Only this time, my call was a question. Where? I double flushed just to be sure, and then I waited. I can understand how crazy this must sound to you, but I was desperate. I needed to ensure that pending the end of our father's feud, Gabriel and I would consummate our pact and secure dominion of my future. But a response did not come. Minutes passed, and in a panic, I resent the question down the waste-flecked tube. As I flushed a final time, something quite curious happened. At first, I assumed the image to be a product of my mania. A slender white worm with my lovely Gabriel's face slithered up the mouth of the toilet, straining forward before eventually sliding back out of view with the water's pull. But the more I thought, the more I was sure that this, in combination with the lilt of his voice, could be no mere hallucination. "Gabriel?" I asked of the water to no avail, and after an excruciating minute with no response, I flushed the question again. This time, a response.
The toilet is the tunnel.
The tunnel. For any potential listener in our conversation, the sentence may be unclear. But for Gabriel and I, the tunnel could only have one meaning. The secret passage out of our homes which led from one to the other was in the sewage line. And this fact, combined with the image of my lover appearing at the toilet's mouth, gave me an idea. I had nightmares as a child of my family reducing themselves to flesh-warped worms. They would wrap themselves around my wrists, my ankles. They bound me to my bed in the quiet of the night and forced medicinal tinctures down my throat. I would wake crying and run to my mother in her room, or my father in his, and describe the horrid nature of this child's concocted memory. The nightmare always began with a member of my bloodline pressing themselves against a thin opening, whether it be a pipe or a grate, concentrating their facade of flesh and frame and maneuvering their bodies into something other through sheer force of will and transgression of all natural laws, as those of wealth and power are wont to do. Nightmare or not, I wanted my Gabriel, and nothing would stand between me and my true desire. I flipped the seat up and took a deep breath. I flushed and then exhaled along with the water I expelled. I leaned forward and began my attempt. You have to imagine just how silly one of wealth must feel pressing their face down into the toilet. It was not lost on me that I was giving myself the swirly so many diminutive and envious children wish they could have given me. I relented, gasped for air, and brought my hand up to my face. But there was no difference and no deformity, a nightmare indeed. I refused to stop. Again I pressed into the porcelain, walking my feet back against the opposite wall, hoping gravity would aid in my deranged pursuit. As I fought with my toilet, I imagined my cheekbones snapping, my nose flattening, the caving of my cranium into my cerebrum, the whole of my face twisting inward to resemble my throat, to resemble this tube I longed to inhabit. I flushed and I flushed, furiously hammering the lever. I needed to come up for air, but I refused. I am not like you see, where mere mortals might need to breathe once every minute or two. I was taught in all cases that I require far less, but deserved far more. I lifted 1 foot away from the wall and slammed it back down in an attempt to leap into the hole before me. That did something, certainly. I felt a pop and blood stained the white throne, the toilet water. I grinned through the pain, knowing this was the beginning of my ascendance into the being I envisioned myself capable of. And so it was. I continued jumping off of the wall, smashing the face I no longer had use for into a shape more desirable. Each crunch, each further pulverization brought more blood and more excruciating pain. My head began to flatten, and I am unsure quite where my skull and brain had gone, but I reached up and molded this new, soggy flesh into the hot dog shape that currently suited me, before resuming my cranial collisions. Next, I worked on my cheekbones, fracturing and discarding the unnecessary excess. My jaw snapped entirely off, and my teeth decorated the tile floor. From my shoulders raised a single worm, slightly wider than a pointed finger or a folded tongue. This blood-slicked tube flopped lazily about, lacking any muscle to guide it of its own will, and so I gripped its length with both my hands and fed it back into the toilet bowl so as to begin to work on my shoulders. Over the hours this process took, I became an expert at flattening my feet to the wall and jackhammering my body into shape. My collarbone snapped almost immediately, but my shoulders took quite a bit more work. One finally popped from its socket, then the other followed suit. I can't quite remember now whether my arms fell away from my body entirely or if they are still somewhere down in here, this pile that is now me. As with exiting the canal of my mother, the shoulders were the worst and most painful bit. So mirrored my escape of the body she had given me and my birth through the sewer canal. The rest of my torso flattened, crunched, and slapped together in a most satisfying way, like popping the world's largest whitehead and tubing out every last drop of pus. My waist was far too slender and frail to put up much of a fight. Finally, remained only the process of pressing those kneecaps together. I wriggled farther down along the sewer line until they snapped, shattered, and were left behind with the other useless bits of me, for my father to find floating in the gore-soaked lavatory. I was off, adrift, streaming down the tube with the help of gravity. When I arrived at the pipe's bends, what remained of my body would further discard those pieces that meant the least to me, allowing me to press on. Eventually, the line widened, and the slick, wet, mucus-lined tubes became easier and easier to traverse, until I was flying rapidly toward my goal, my love. I would look around wildly. Did I still have eyes at all? Scanning for the point where my waistline and my lovers joined together in holy matrimony. Eventually, I was deposited out into the sewer proper, plopping down in a truly putrid pile of myself, and I began to panic. Had I missed the hidden passage? I was on the verge of tears, or at least whatever this new body might still be capable of producing in moments of despair, when a sound further down the tunnel gave me pause. The voice gurgled in imitation of the countless toilet flushes I had endured. I rotated within the mess of myself to gaze upon my golden Gabriel. He was encrusted with the surrounding sewage, a mixture of hair and loose skin, serpentine extremities and holes burrowing between stacked folds. We drifted toward one another in slow motion, fate torturing us one last time as any movements of this new state took monumental effort. I began to sweat from pores I did not know I had, and the budding precipitation of my flesh-like cloud allowed me to understand my newfound anatomy for the first time. My skin had dripped down into doughy layers, flattening against itself. Fingers and toes, nipples and elbows and ankle bones were hidden treasures drifting within my many mounds. A number of my orifices, old and new alike, had stacked upon each other and formed a tunnel that snaked throughout my core, which I could squeeze shut and throw open against the wet floor beneath me to propel myself toward my gooey Gabriel. He was quite another image altogether. My beautiful boy was long and thin. Spider-like fingers of 4 or 5 feet in length jutted at every angle from his sausage-shaped center. These barbs attached to the walls and the ceiling of the tunnel and fought against one another. My darling had not yet mastered his motor functions, but no matter. I oozed toward him at a steady pace, and he wriggled backwards and forwards, grunting loudly with the effort. This prelude to our looming passions echoed down the corridor and filled me with a dreadful delight. Closer and closer we came toward one another. I had a deep hunger that only he could satiate. And from his uncontrollable spasms, I could see he felt the same for me. Unbridled lust for this moment had allowed us to surpass all human ambition. We are truly the most powerful people in this world. And finally, skin to sliming skin, we connected. Arthritic appendages arched and bored beautifully within my confining countenance. Deeply, deeply, deeper still we pressed upon the other person with a passion prevailing over all others. Open sores met with sour scents. Teeth arranged like vertebrae tickled my tight contractions. We wound ourselves within wounds, wedging with reckless abandon. I was waist deep in one of his chest cavities when I realized his hole was not his, but my womb. My lips, one on either side of me, lapped at the lake within his thigh, and his hundreds of tiny tendrils took me by surprise when they tore into my taint and became my own to prod with. What once resembled my Gabriel's face was lost, and we have not seen it since. Within my many manes of hair gathered from the sewer floor. He was, she was, we, and we were free to be, undulating over and over and over again in a violent arrival. My Gabriel, his Violet. We constricted here in the seat of our family's power as undeniable proof of our everlasting connection. From this point forward, we shall never be separated. And that is precisely where you come in, my darling child. Standing there beyond the manhole's gate, mouth agape, surely in awe of the true depths of mine and Gabriel's love for one another. No, do not flee. I must ask that you tell our fathers we are trapped down here. You see, we may have slimmed down for the journey from residence to relations, but we are, in fact, quite conjoined. Stuck, some might even say, and we cannot, for the life of us, find an exit that will admit our many knots, our striated joints, our fingers trapped and our tongues tied. No, do not scream, my dear. You are safe. No, where are you going? Well, she is off, Gabriel. In search of mine or your father, no doubt. Yes, no doubt.
The Dead Earth podcast is created by Emily Lyles, Taylor Normington, John Reeder, and Dan Wallace. All stories, unless otherwise noted, are written by Taylor Normington. Gutterlovers was performed by Emily Lyles. Our logo artwork is designed by Chloe Burns. You can find more of her work on Instagram at Tiny Moon Studios. Episodic artwork by Amy DeHaan. Our website is deadearthpodcast.com. Thank you for listening.